Hi everyone, it's Katrina.
Number 10. City in the Basement. One day in 1963, a man decided to upgrade his basement when he made the archaeological discovery of the decade. In a small town in Turkey, the man bashed a hole in the wall with a sledgehammer, revealing a passageway to an underground world. Turns out his house was backed up against an entire city hidden underground. The city sits up to 250 feet below the surface of the earth. The 18-story mega-city was once home to thousands of people. Archaeologists estimate that it had enough space in its hollow tunnels and galleries to fit over 20,000 residents. But how in the world did the underground city get started? Researchers believe it happened around 3,000 years ago, when the local people kept getting invaded. To hide from violence, the townspeople went underground. Then, as Christianity began to spread, Christians started to escape underground to protect themselves. They started off small, with covered rooms and sanctuaries in case an invasion happened. Then, over many centuries, the city expanded and became a metropolis of its own, hiding underneath the hills. There were air shafts and water channels, room for animals, and even chapels and schools. The people there probably lived quite comfortably, although not having sunlight was probably annoying. The good thing was that their wells went deep underground and couldn't be poisoned by the enemy. When danger was near, everyone hid underground and blocked the access tunnels with round stone doors. Derinkuyu wasn't alone. Cappadocia is home to over 250 underground cities, but only about 10% is accessible. Imagine all of the history that was unleashed when a man suddenly decided to do some home renovations. Oldest gold treasure in the world. On December 8, 1949, three brothers were working near the railway station when they found something remarkable. They were in the small Bulgarian town of Panagayurishte. The brothers, Pavel, Petko, and Mikhail Daykov, uncovered what scientists say is one of the richest treasures ever found in Europe. They were just trying to do their jobs when they unearthed an unprecedented number of ancient Thracian artifacts. It's now known as the Panagayurishte treasure, and it consisted of bowls and ceramics gilded with gold, wine jugs decorated with ancient Thracian images, and even ceremonial goblets made from 24-karat gold. The Daykov brothers had uncovered an insane amount of gold and several never-before-seen vessels decorated by skilled Thracian hands almost 2,500 years ago. The treasure trove was likely part of a royal burial, perhaps buried alongside King Suthes III upon his death in the late 4th century BC. The treasure is now one of the best surviving collections of Thracian artifacts in the world. It's been displayed at museums across the globe, but spends most of its time at the National Museum of History in Sofia, Bulgaria. In total, the three brothers found 165 silver objects, 131 gilded with gold. They were crafted when Thrace was at its most powerful, dominating the Balkan Peninsula. But with the rise of the Roman Republic, Thrace was destroyed and its people were subjugated and taken as slaves. The most famous Thracian was Spartacus himself, who led a slave revolt in 73 BC, nearly toppling the Roman Republic. An accidental tomb discovery. A team of Swiss and Egyptian archaeologists recently discovered a 1,100-year-old tomb in the Valley of the Kings. The tomb belongs to a woman who doesn't seem to have any relation to the royal families buried in the crypt. As you may know already, this is the place where many of the most important rulers of Egypt were buried starting about 3,000 years ago. The most famous is Tutankhamun, the boy king whose tomb was uncovered in 1922 by British archaeologists. Field Director for Excavations Elena Pauline Growth said the discovery was a complete accident. They weren't even looking for tombs when they came across its entrance by mistake. But once they'd found it, they couldn't just leave a newly discovered tomb unopened. So they went inside to investigate. The researchers uncovered the coffin of a female singer named Nemes Bastet. Archaeologists say she was likely tasked with protecting the feline deity Bastet through song. She may have even been the daughter of a high priest during the 22nd dynasty. The valley was specifically for kings and their close family members, as well as their advisors. And so, finding a random female singer didn't quite make sense for researchers. Archaeologists think she may have been deposited in someone else's tomb 400 years after the original was used. They didn't know who the tomb was originally for, but it most certainly wasn't built for Nemes Bastet. It's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to Adam Lars and Guy Gamer for supporting this channel. If you are new here, don't forget to subscribe and join the family. Eggs at the lake. A young boy in China was out for a day of fun in the sun at a local lake when he came across a dinosaur nest. The 10-year-old was playing on the lake shore when he found fossilized eggs from a dinosaur that lived 66 million years ago. The discovery was made in the city of Heiyuan in Guangdong province. The boy was apparently looking for something he could use to crack open walnuts when he found what he initially assumed to be egg-shaped rocks. But luckily for scientists, this particular young boy already had a fascination with all things dinosaur. And so, it didn't take long for him to realize he was handling something very precious. When asked about the discovery by local news, the boy said he learned about dinosaurs at school and had a pretty good idea about fossils. He showed his mother what he found and they alerted the local museum. Paleontologists confirmed the ancient dinosaur nest. They found a whole heap of eggs preserved just underneath the sand at the edge of the lake. According to experts, the eggs came from the Cretaceous period, and they were laid by a dinosaur only a few years before the extinction event that wiped them out. Even more amazing is that similar discoveries have been made in the city before. In 2015, workmen laying sewage pipes found a collection of over 40 dinosaur eggs, and since then, an estimated 17,000 eggs have been uncovered throughout the city. This was once a dinosaur breeding ground, a place where prehistoric beasts came to peacefully lay their eggs away from potential predators. The donkey archaeologist. In 1996, a donkey made one of the most important archaeological discoveries in Egyptian history. Antiquities security personnel were patrolling the Temple of Alexander in the Bahariya oasis near Cairo when their donkey got loose and stepped through a hole in the ground. The donkey's leg got stuck, and its handler had to help it get free. And that was when they discovered that the donkey had broken through into a sprawling complex of tombs. These tombs would later prove to contain breathtaking wall paintings and priceless mummies. After the donkey made the find, renowned Egyptologist Zahi Hawass descended on the site with his team and began excavations. The tomb is now called the Valley of the Golden Mummies, and some experts believe it's even more impressive than the Valley of the Kings near Luxor. Experts have estimated there to be as many as 10,000 mummies hiding in underground chambers and forgotten tombs. Most of them date from the Greco-Roman period between 332 BC and 395 AD. It's now been over 20 years since the discovery. In those years, archaeologists gained a lot of information about how Greek and Roman cultures interacted with ancient Egyptian culture. The mummies in these tombs were mostly Greco-Roman elites who took a liking to the Egyptian burial traditions. They were buried in typical Egyptian fashion, but with a Greco-Roman flair. It's an excellent example of how one ancient culture took a shine to another one and then started copying their traditions. The ghost ship. In the middle of the Baltic Sea, a ghost ship was found by complete accident in 2003, but it took 7 years for a full-scale archaeological expedition to be launched in order to study the mystery vessel. This was because nobody was looking for it in the first place, and so a whole new expedition had to be organized. The discovery was made by a company called Deep Sea Productions, whose team was searching for a reconnaissance plane that vanished in 1952 during the Cold War. The scanner picked up a shipwreck, and further investigation revealed it to be nearly intact. The Baltic Sea is home to plenty of ships that have crashed or been destroyed over the past several thousand years, but finding one completely intact is a miracle. So the team took 7 years to gear up and went back in 2010 to learn as much about the ship as they could. The subsequent investigations revealed that the ghost ship was 85 feet long and that it operated during the 17th century. The team also determined that it was likely a merchant vessel that may have been developed by the Dutch around the year 1650. However, nobody knows for sure which flag the ship sailed under. There were thousands of Dutch merchant ships crossing the Baltic Sea in the 17th century, which is why investigators believe it belonged to the Dutch. But it very well could have been under the control of another nation as well. Until more information is uncovered, archaeologists can't say for sure. Routine road work. In northeast Iran, a routine road construction project revealed a medieval tunnel that appears to be connected to the nearby Shar el-Belkis castle. The castle is an ancient fortress that dates back to the Sasanian Empire that ruled between 224 and 651 AD. This was the last Iranian empire before the rise of the Muslim conquest that changed the world in the 7th century. The fortress is still in fantastic condition, with its walls and ramparts overlooking the sprawling landscape. The tunnel appears to stretch over 11 miles. Experts believe it could have been part of an undiscovered city hiding underground. However, more excavations are required before anyone can figure out the secrets of the tunnel. This isn't even the first time a secret underground passage has been found by accident in Iran. Another recent construction project revealed the lost subterranean city of Nushabad. This place was hollowed out by ancient Iranians seeking protection from their enemies around 15,000 years ago. The tunnel found near the castle appears to be about 600 years younger and was likely used for similar purposes. Hidden in plain sight. Archaeologists accidentally found the lost temple of Thutmose I after trying to find it for nearly 50 years. The temple was found hiding in plain sight, right in front of everyone, but nobody had recognized it. It was only recently that a Polish Egyptologist identified the remains of the temple and shocked the archaeological community. Thutmose I ruled ancient Egypt between 1506 and 1493 BC. He was especially popular for his building projects, which made Egypt look more glorious and also contributed to the economy. Many historians even believe it was Thutmose I who ordered the construction of a tomb for himself in the Valley of the Kings. He was a fairly important individual, and for decades, scientists tried desperately to uncover his temple. Then came Jadwiga Iwasztuk, who accidentally found decorated fragments of blocks sitting in storage at the Egyptian Ministry of State for Antiquities. The blocks were thought to belong to a totally different temple from the reign of Hatshepsut, but in reality, the fragments had been misidentified. What this meant was that everyone already knew where the temple of Thutmose I was. They just got the identification wrong, thinking the mysterious temple belonged to someone else entirely. The accidental discovery was little more than one archaeologist fixing another archaeologist's mistake. Inca tomb. In a working-class neighborhood in Lima, the modern capital of Peru, something from the forgotten world of the Inca was discovered. Scientists unearthed a tomb from the days of the Inca Empire underneath someone's house in the heart of the capital. The burial is about 500 years old and contains human remains wrapped in cloth. Lead archaeologist Julio Abanto says the people who were entombed here likely belonged to the elite society of Ruricancho in the 15th century. This society ruled over the area of Lima just before the Inca came into power in the 1400s. The Inca defeated and subjugated the Ruricancho only a few years before they themselves were defeated by the Spanish in 1532. The person most surprised by the discovery is Hipólito Tica, the owner of the house the tomb was found under. He had some building plans for his property which required an archaeological survey before they could continue. This particular residential district is known for its archaeological finds, so the city makes you do a survey before completing building work. It was during the survey that the mysterious tomb was revealed. It's a fantastic example of just how easy it is for the past to be buried beneath the present. The Terracotta Farmers. On March 29, 1974, a group of peasants were busy digging a well in China's Shanxi province. The country was going through a drought at the time, and there were widespread food issues. So these people mostly lived in a very poor area. They were working hard with their bare hands when suddenly they started coming across fragments of clay. The peasants were confused by this, but they kept digging under the impression that they might find buried treasure. Little did they know, they were about to stumble onto the greatest treasure known to China, and one of the greatest archaeological sites in the world. What they were really digging up were pieces of terracotta warriors, the life-size statues of soldiers buried with the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huangdi, over 2,000 years ago. Huangdi became the unifier of China in 221 BC, and when he died, he was given a burial that even the greatest Egyptian pharaohs would be jealous of. But over the centuries, his tomb was forgotten. It was covered by several feet of soil and eventually was lost. Over the past almost 50 years, archaeologists have uncovered 600 burial pits, multiple underground vaults, and 8,000 terracotta warriors. The mausoleum itself is now 3.9 square miles, showcasing 3 main pits full of cracked, but mostly intact, terracotta soldiers. The site now ranks alongside the Great Wall and the Forbidden City as one of the most historically important places in China.
The tortured mummy. Researchers with the National University of San Marcos came across one of the most horrifying mummies in all of Peru. They found the mummified corpse of an individual inside an underground tomb. The mummy predates the Inca and was left down in the dark with their body bound in rope as if they were the victim of some sadistic serial killer. The discovery was made on the outskirts of Lima, a place which was a bustling community of traders and early farmers long before Lima became an international city. This was around 1,200 years ago. And here, in the archaeological complex of Cajamarquilla, the tortured mummy was found. The individual's burial chamber was so big, archaeologists could stand up inside it without brushing their heads against the top. After analyzing the mummy, researchers are confident it was a young man between the ages of 18 and 22 when he died. He was placed gently inside the burial chamber against a pile of rocks, bound with ropes and then sealed away from the daylight. Oddly enough, he was also found near the remains of a dog and a guinea pig. The condition of the mummy has baffled scientists. They don't know why he was bound in such a bizarre way. It's an anomaly in the world of Peruvian mummies. And get this! The researchers also found the remains of mollusks near the entrance to the burial chamber. They believe the mollusks were left over from people who were eating when they visited the gravesite. It's almost as if people showed up to see the mummy like they would a tourist attraction, and gorged themselves on mollusks while hanging out near the entrance. Lost Subterranean Church. In the ancient city of Derbent, Russia, nuclear physicists have turned into unlikely archaeologists. These scientists used muon radiography to scan a subterranean building not far from the medieval fortress of Narinkala. For many years, archaeologists had suspected the building was once part of a Christian temple. But most of the building is underground, with nothing but a small dome visible over the surface. And because it's considered a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the archaeologists aren't allowed to excavate or go inside. So instead, they turned to the nuclear physicists. Using their radiography scan, they identified what might just be one of the oldest Christian churches in the world. The subterranean building dates back to around 300 AD, but was buried in the 8th century after the Arab conquest of the city. The scan revealed its exact size and shape. The structure was built in the shape of a cross, 36 feet high, 50 feet long, and 44 feet wide. It was clearly a temple, and most likely one of the earliest places for worshipping Christ. It may have originally been a Zoroastrian fire temple before Christianity came to the region 2,000 years ago, then was converted to the New World religion. The Hypogeum. The Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni, known simply as the Hypogeum, is an ancient subterranean structure dating back to the Neolithic days, around 3,300 BC. It's located on the island of Malta and is the most impressive architectural achievement of the island's prehistory. In Greek, the word hypogeum translates to underground. It's believed that the Hypogeum was a sanctuary and a mausoleum, as the skeletal remains of over 7,000 people have been documented inside by archaeologists. It was an underground temple and burial site, and is the most well-preserved example of Maltese temple building from ancient times. The discovery of the structure dates back to 1902, when workers building a new housing development accidentally smashed through its roof. The workers initially tried to hide the temple, as they didn't want their housing development to be ruined by an archaeological site, but it was found out and is now one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world. The main reason for the Hypogeum's fame is just how intricate and complex the whole structure is. There are 3 levels carved out of the soft limestone fully underground. These levels are connected through passages and chambers, and the whole thing is a kind of underground labyrinth. The upper level was most likely occupied first, and then was expanded as the years went on and filled with dead bodies. The Amphibian Death Pit. Archaeologists in England recently discovered a terrifying pit under the ground of a seemingly ordinary field. The pit goes back 2,000 years and was filled with the corpses of frogs and toads. Not warm corpses, but piles of shattered bones. Around 8,000 bones, to be exact. Even after the excavations were finished, archaeologists were left scratching their heads. Nobody knows why there is a gigantic underground pit filled with frog and toad bones, although there are some theories, of course. Some say these frogs were moving in search of water to mate, but instead fell into a deep ditch they couldn't jump their way out of. Others say it may have been something even more sinister. Vicky Ewins from the Museum of London Archaeology says it's a puzzling and unexpected find. The bones came from between the years 400 BC and 700 AD, and there are about 350 individuals in total. They were found next to a roundhouse in an ancient and nameless settlement, buried underneath a ditch. Even more mysterious is that there is no evidence that these frogs and toads were ever eaten by the local people, yet for some bizarre reason, they were all discarded in a huge pit. Another theory is that they had all been infected by a virus. There doesn't seem to be any indication that the locals had anything to do with their deaths, and yet it's all extremely mysterious. For all we know, this ancient settlement was occupied by frog-slaughtering cultists, Reclusive Arachnids. Western Australia was once covered in lush forests and all kinds of unusual creatures. One of these creatures in the ancient Australian forests were called schizomids, eyeless critters who have been around for at least 66 million years. As Australia grew hotter and drier and the continent gradually shifted toward the equator, the forests died. And as they died, the schizomids had to find a new home. So they fled underground. Schizomids are distantly related to spiders and scorpions and can be found all over the world. But it's only in Western Australia where they live underground. 56 species have been found by researchers in the Pilbara region, a shockingly diverse group for such a tiny area. Biologists believe the reason for such unheard-of diversity is due to their subterranean lifestyle. As the tiny critters buried themselves underground to survive, they became extremely isolated. They were separated by long stretches of land and cooked under the hot sun. With many groups of these creatures stuck under the ground, each one evolved its own path. Being underground had the same effect as being dropped on different islands. It could be a glimpse into our own future if the temperature above ground becomes so hot that we're forced into living beneath the surface, like a bunch of schizomids. The Templar Tunnel. In the city of Acre, located in modern Israel, there is an underground passage that was built by the Knights Templar and then lost for 700 years. The tunnel was built during the Kingdom of Jerusalem and served as a strategic corridor that connected the port to the palace occupied by the Templars. They could use the secret passageway to slip out of the city unnoticed and onto a boat. But then came the 13th century, and that was when disaster struck. The city of Acre fell to the Mamluks, the Templars were expelled, and the tunnel was lost and forgotten. It wasn't until 1994 that the tunnel was found by accident. A woman was fighting with a blocked sewage pipe under her house when she came across its entrance. But let's go back to the formation of the tunnel. Jerusalem was captured by the Muslims and their leader Saladin in the year 1187. The Templars were kicked out of their main headquarters, and much of the kingdom was overrun. There were only a few isolated Crusader fortresses that remained resistant to the Muslim invasion. In 1189, Guy de Lusignan, the king of Jerusalem, launched a counterattack. He marched against the city of Acre, kicked out the invaders, and was soon reinforced by the armies of the Third Crusade from Europe. The Crusaders were such a big part of the counteroffensive that with Acre captured, they were allocated the entire southwestern sector. That was where their fortress was built, and where this tunnel was cut to lead down to the pier. Fossils under Mars. One of the most incredible underground discoveries took place off our planet, underneath the dusty surface of the Red Planet. NASA's Perseverance rover discovered rocks that may have the potential to hold fossils of extinct Martian life. The rover uncovered layers of sediment at the bottom of the Jezero crater. which scientists say could have once housed a large lake. The layers of sediment deposits go back 3.6 billion years. If there had been a lake here all that time ago, chances are whatever lived in it died and was preserved in the sediment. However, no alien life has been confirmed just yet. The Perseverance rover took off in July of 2020. It took 7 months to reach Mars, then even longer to make its way to the crater. While the rover is checking out the rocks in search of fossils, it can't exactly dig as deep as it may need to. If Mars is anything like our own planet, the fossils are located just underneath the surface. Scientists believe that if we dig deep enough, especially on the bottom of a dried lake, that will be our best bet at finding evidence of alien life. A forgotten mine. In Cheshire, a region in northwest England, an abandoned cobalt mine dating back 200 years has recently been explored by some very brave archaeologists. Jamie Lund with the National Trust and Ed Coughlin with the Derbyshire Caving Club tunneled deep into the long-forgotten cobalt mine and came across an unexpected plethora of artifacts. The mine itself was in production during the Napoleonic Wars. That was back in the 1800s when Napoleon Bonaparte tried to take over the world in the name of France and came up short. The mine was most likely abandoned by the year 1810 and without much warning. Jamie and Ed discovered items abandoned by the miners, left behind as if they had run out of the mine in a hurry and never came back. They discovered leather shoes, a metal button from a jacket, pieces of mining equipment, and even clay pipes used to smoke tobacco. One of the coolest discoveries found was a clay bowl that some of the more superstitious miners buried inside of a wall to give thanks to the mine for the quality of the minerals it produced. This was an old superstition that miners practiced, giving the bull as an offering to the mine itself, as if it were a deity. Under Angkor. Ankor Wat is considered the greatest temple complex the world has ever seen. Angkor was the capital of the Khmer Empire in the 12th century. It took an incredible 5 million tons of sandstone to build this ancient city, which doubled as a Hindu sanctuary riddled with sacred temples. It was one of the greatest constructs in Asia, and after the crushing of the Khmer Empire in the 15th century, it was lost to the jungle. These days, Ankor Wat is the premier tourist destination of Cambodia, but some wonder if there is more to the site than meets the eye. There is a theory that says underneath the central shrine of Ankor Wat is a secret hidden chamber. It's interesting because if you look at the features of the temple complex, there is clearly a rising gradient up to the central shrine. The city was built at ground level with sand and clay, but for some reason they made an artificial hill and stacked the biggest temple right on top of it. So, what could be hiding underneath the floor of Ankor Wat? One theory is that there is an energy device hiding there. This is from the same people who believe the Pyramid of Giza is an ancient super battery left behind by aliens. In reality, there could be some kind of mysterious crypt or secret dungeon used to conduct rituals. Or maybe there is nothing at all. Bavarian tunnels. In the German state of Bavaria, there are over 700 tunnel networks spread throughout the region. These are subterranean passages, which scientists know very little about. Some say they were built as graves, some say they were ritual spaces where ghoulish things took place, and others believe they were hideaways to protect villagers from marauding bandits. All we know for sure is that there are nearly 1,000 of these subterranean vaults that have already been found, and there could possibly be even more that have collapsed or have never been documented. One of these holes was found by a dairy farmer. She was walking through a meadow with her cows when one of them suddenly fell into a hole. A crater opened up beneath the cow's feet, and the poor girl fell into it up to her hips. It was an unfortunate accident for the cow, but revealed a mysterious piece of ancient history. After the misfortune with the bovine was finished, Beat and her husband Rudy went to check out the mysterious hole. It was narrow, damp, and led diagonally into the earth. Rudy traveled deep into the hole until he realized quite abruptly that he could no longer hear anything. He also started having difficulty breathing, so he crawled his way back out. But this is only one example. Local geologists say the entire state of Bavaria is perforated with underground mazes, and nobody knows why. The locals call them goblin holes. They tell stories of the mischievous goblins who lived in these small dwellings and tormented people in the Middle Ages.
The fortress under Alcatraz. Alcatraz is famous for being an ultra-secure prison that housed some of the worst criminals in American history, including the likes of Prohibition gangster Al Capone. But hiding underneath the prison, below the foundations of the building, are the ruins of a hidden military complex. Researchers have revealed pieces of the military fortress from the 1860s. Long before Alcatraz was ever an offshore prison site in the San Francisco Bay, it was a U.S. military base. Underground structures were built in the middle of the 19th century as part of a large-scale fortification operation. Researchers from Binghamton University discovered these lost structures using scans and radar to look beneath the island. They identified a vaulted brick tunnel and ancient ventilation ducts, all just inches below the ground. According to archaeologist Timothy DeSmet, who was involved in the research, the concrete surface of the recreation yard is thin. Directly underneath it is earthwork from the original military fortress. But even deeper are the ruins of the original lighthouse, the very first thing built by modern humans on the island of Alcatraz. These ruins haven't been found yet, but they must be underneath the other layers of construction somewhere. The lighthouse on Alcatraz was short-lived, replaced by the military fortification in the 1800s. Then, less than a century later in the early 1900s, the military infrastructure was converted into a prison. That continued until Alcatraz became too expensive to run and closed in 1963. The tunnels at Bayi. Bayi was a village on the shore of the Bay of Naples in Italy, which flourished due to its proximity to the much larger city of Naples. It was a coastal city not far from a volcanic complex of terrifying proportions. Close to the city of Bayi is a geological marvel called the Phlegraean Fields. When the Greeks settled in the area, they saw the fields as a kind of hellish landscape that they immediately associated with the land of the dead. That's because the fields are part of the caldera of a volcano that was once the twin of Mount Vesuvius to the east. The volcano erupted in 1538, but it has since remained dormant. Much of its crater is currently underwater, and the only bit that's accessible is a flat land of rubble shrouded by clouds of sulfurous gas. To the Greeks, this really did look like a landscape from the underworld. In the 1960s, archaeologist Robert Paget explored a mysterious complex of underground tunnels spreading out from the city of Bayi. These tunnels were carved at least 2,700 years ago, maybe even earlier. The underground corridors are like a scary labyrinth of pure darkness, likely meant to simulate a descent into Hades. To the Greeks, Hades was a very real place. They believed that certain parts of the earth opened to allow passage down into the underworld. The Phlegraean Fields was one of these places, inaccessible to the living because they would choke on the toxic smoke and die. The underground tunnels were likely used in death rituals. There was possibly even a local oracle of the dead who told prophecies to those brave enough to traverse the underground halls. Predjama Castle. In southern Slovenia is Predjama Castle, a mighty fortification carved into the side of a cliff and extending 9 miles underneath it. This mysterious castle, which has been standing for over 800 years, was once used to help a local hero evade capture. It's been labeled the largest cave castle in the world, like something out of a bizarre fairy tale. The facade of the castle extends out from the cave mouth roughly 400 feet above ground. The castle then appears to shrink as its rooms and turrets move deeper into the cavern. Once out of sight, there are miles upon miles of tunnels, chambers, and secrets that still have yet to be uncovered. The first mention of this castle dates back to 1202, but it didn't become famous until the 15th century when Erasem Luger, a famous knight, moved in. He was like the Eastern European version of Robin Hood. He would steal from the rich and give to the poor. When Austria and Hungary went to war in the 1400s, Luger allied himself with the Hungarians and fled to Predjama Castle. From there, he continued to wreak havoc on the countryside by sneaking out of his castle through secret underground passages. He continued stealing from the rich and giving money to the poor people of Hungary. When the Austrians attempted to take his castle in 1484, they failed. It was too difficult to find their way through. In the end, Erasmus was killed by a stray cannonball that shattered the wall of his bathroom as he sat on the toilet. Midnight Terror Cave. There is an underground pit of darkness in Belize called the Midnight Terror Cave. It got its name after a looter discovered its entrance, fell inside, and was injured. A local Mennonite community rescued the looter, and shortly after, archaeologists were informed of the shocking discovery. Researchers with California State University surveyed the cave in 2008, discovering the remains of an unbelievable 118 sacrificial victims. These were people killed by the Maya civilization between 250 and 925 AD. The Nightmare Terror Cave is currently one of the most horrific sacrificial zones ever used by the Maya. For a reason still unknown, the Maya dragged willing or unwilling victims into this dark and dreary pit in the earth, then killed them in worship of Chak, the Maya rain god. Chak was believed to use his lightning axe to strike the clouds above and produce torrents of rain. He was almost like the Mayan version of Thor, but not many people have heard of him before. So why did the Maya feel it necessary to sacrifice people to their rain god? Researchers believe it was because they were experiencing significant drought. In a desperate bid to appease the gods, they killed dozens of people in the underground, hoping for rain. But that rain never came, and their civilization came crashing down. Big shout out to Mark Robles and Jerry Miles. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. The Tomb of the Winter Solstice. A team of archaeologists from the University of Malaga recently uncovered what is believed to be the oldest ancient Egyptian tomb oriented to the winter solstice. This doesn't mean the oldest Egyptian tomb in history, but the oldest one positioned in such a way that the light of the winter solstice shines through its opening and illuminates the dusty corridor of the tomb. The tomb was discovered at the necropolis of Kubet el Hawa on the western bank of the Nile, not far from the city of Aswan. It was here where many ancient nobles and priests were buried during the Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt. This particular tomb likely belonged to the governor of the city of Elephantine in 1830 BC. You might be wondering how researchers know that the tomb was oriented toward the winter solstice almost 4,000 years ago. Researchers were able to use software that calculates the position of the sun in ancient times. It's different than it is now. 40 centuries ago, the sun on the morning of the winter solstice pointed directly into the tomb and made it shine brilliantly. This was likely to do with the Egyptian idea of rebirth, with the tomb mimicking the solar cycle. The winter solstice was seen as the victory of sunlight over darkness, an important piece of symbolism. The Guanhua Caves. The Guanhua Caves are all that remain of a ruined cave complex occupied by a semi-subterranean group of people living near Beijing about 2,000 years ago. The origins of the community are extremely mysterious because nobody knows who founded the city, why they disappeared, or what kind of community they even had. The settlement may have been established during the Liao dynasty, but no one's sure. Some Chinese historians theorize the caves were occupied by outlaws. Some believe it may have been a military garrison, but the truth is that we just don't know. The caves themselves are carved out of the solid rock face of a cliff. The rooms are packed so closely together, one on top of the other, that it gives the illusion of a beehive. There are approximately 117 caves linked like a gigantic subterranean apartment building. Within those caves are 350 chambers, with the palace of the chieftain located at the very bottom of the complex. We know where the ruler lived because the residence is significantly more elaborate than the rest, with huge support columns and 8 massive rooms. The Guanhua Caves were discovered in 1984, and yet we are still no closer to learning the identity of the builders. There are no historical records of people living in the caves. Also, archaeologists believe they only occupied the extensive place for around 30 years. It took an insane amount of effort to carve a city in the rock of a cliff, and then the people just packed up and moved away, leaving no traces of themselves behind. Mega ripples. 66 million years ago, an asteroid struck the surface of the planet and devastated all life, causing the dinosaurs to go extinct. The exact impact point was the Yucatan Peninsula. This space rock hit Mexico so hard that the surface of the planet rippled like a stone being dropped in the water. These ripples were created by a shockwave so intense that most creatures caught within it died. The geological scars left behind by the blast are called mega ripples, and some of them are 5 stories tall. Researchers recently identified some of these mega ripples hiding underneath Louisiana. Imagine a bowling ball falling onto a flat and sandy beach. It impacts the ground so hard that ripples stretch out from the impact zone. Then, before the sand can rest flat again, it freezes solid. That is very similar to what happened with the dinosaur-killing asteroid. It emitted such power that the ground itself rippled, and those ripples never smoothed out. That's why researchers just found 52-foot-tall ripples hiding roughly 5,000 feet beneath central Louisiana. These ripples formed immediately after the asteroid hit Mexico. The reason you don't see them now is that over the following millions of years, the Earth's surface changed. Oceans came and went, millions of tons of soil shifted, and the ripples, like a series of rolling hills, were buried thousands of feet beneath where the surface is now. The Kansas Salt Underground. Hidden underneath Kansas are winding tunnels where people have been extracting salt for decades. Hiding 650 feet below the surface of Kansas are multiple salt deposits that formed as far back as 280 million years ago. One of the biggest and most impressive salt mines is Strataca in Hutchinson. It's one of the 16 salt mines in the United States and the only one open to tourists. The salt mine began operation in 1923 under the ownership of the Carey Salt Company. The mine quickly grew to cover an astounding 980 acres. If each excavated chamber were connected to one another, they would stretch for a staggering 150 miles. Each room of extracted salt is held together structurally by solid salt pillars about 40 feet square, creating unbelievable natural columns like the pillars holding up some underground dwarf ruin. It's possible to visit these amazing underground facilities. Just keep in mind you have to descend deep into the Earth's surface, and that can be a truly humbling experience. Aqueduct under Armenian melon field. In 2019, German researchers shoveled aside a patch of ripe melons on a hot summer day. They then broke the surface of the melon field where they were conducting their investigation and found a huge slab of Roman concrete. The concrete was just a few inches below the field, about as unsuspecting of a place as you can find. In the middle of this green, grassy field in Armenia, littered with juicy melons, there was a forgotten Roman secret waiting to be uncovered. The slab of stone discovered is now believed to be one of the hundreds of foundation stones running through the field. These foundation stones were part of an unfinished Roman aqueduct. The aqueduct was originally built around the 2nd century AD, intended to bring fresh water to the city of Artashat. However, the aqueduct was never finished. The Romans managed to build over 15 miles of it, but then stopped. Historians aren't sure exactly what happened, but believe it may have had to do with a local uprising. In 117 AD, the Roman-controlled Armenian capital of Artashat revolted against their oppressors. The chaos and violence that followed the rebellion interrupted the Romans' plans. The aqueduct was abandoned, the Romans were pushed out of the city, and they never did get the fresh water that they so desperately needed. The bits and pieces of the aqueduct's post-production are now largely hidden underneath a gigantic field of watermelons. Old Faithful. Old Faithful is one of the most famous features of Yellowstone National Park. It's a never-ending, erupting column of steam and super hot water, and it's always captivated visitors to the park. Not long ago, researchers discovered an underground cavern that contains the plumbing for Old Faithful, allowing researchers to finally see exactly how the famous geyser works. About 50 feet beneath the geyser, slightly southwest of where the water comes out, is a massive chamber. The researchers were not able to determine exactly how large, but they say it is a huge egg-shaped void at least 50 feet tall. The void connects directly to a pipe angled 24 degrees up and pointed directly at Old Faithful's mouth. Of course, this isn't a metal pipe, but one carved into the ground by natural processes. Scientists call it a geyser conduit. Gas bubbles within the underground chamber act like the boiling bubbles in a heated pot full of water. Geophysicist Jean van de Mollebroek from the University of Savoie said the team was able to physically watch the water rise, enter the conduit, and blast out of Old Faithful. This process happens every 92 minutes. Tiny eruptions create the gas bubbles, which creates heat and pressure, and then the hot water is pushed to the surface. After each blast, it takes roughly 15 minutes for everything to reset. More water flows into the chamber, and seismic activity increases. After an hour and a half, there is another violent steam explosion, just like clockwork.
Down the rabbit hole. In the United Kingdom, a rabbit hole, yes, a seemingly ordinary rabbit hole, led to the discovery of a secret underground sanctuary. This sanctuary appears to have mysterious links to the Knights Templar. This place looks like something straight out of an Indiana Jones movie. The Ancient Caves network, as they've been named, were found hidden underneath a farmer's field in Shropshire. The caves are so well hidden that when photographer Michael Scott went to take pictures of the site, he could barely find them. The network is beneath the surface of the field, completely invisible unless you know exactly where the tiny entrance is. But once inside, it's a totally new world. There are walkways, carved niches, and chambers where people lived, or at least visited 700 years ago. Not to mention, the place is full of spiders. The Knights Templar were a military order put together to protect Christian pilgrims visiting Jerusalem in the 12th century. They grew to have much economic and political sway in medieval Europe, then were wiped out by the angry French king Philip IV in 1307. While the Templars have not been officially connected to the underground network, many believe they were carved by their followers. The Templars were extremely popular, and it wasn't unusual for devout Christians to gather for underground religious ceremonies. Christianity wasn't exactly practiced in the 13th century the way it is now. But the truth is that we don't know what the caves were used for, who carved them, or why they were forgotten for so long. Do you have any theories? Let me know in the comments. A surprise mummy. Police in Peru recently found a mummified human from 800 years ago. The crazy part is that the police seized the mummified human from a food delivery man who had been keeping it in his house for 30 years. The mummy was stashed in the same isothermal bag that the man used for food deliveries. It was essentially in a pizza box, the thing used to keep food warm as it travels from the restaurant to the customer's house. But wait, this story gets even crazier. The man with the mummy was Julio César Bermejo, and last we heard, he's still in police custody. He told local media that the mummy was his spiritual girlfriend. He even had a name for her, Juanita, and claimed that she slept in his room, sometimes even in his bed. Julio kept a preserved person's corpse, someone who died around 1200 AD, in his bed like a plastic girlfriend. But here's the big question. Where in the world did a 26-year-old delivery man get an ancient mummy? Julio said his father brought it home nearly 3 decades ago from somewhere unknown. The Ministry of Culture in Peru says the relic likely came from the Peruvian Andes over 800 miles away. They also confirmed the mummy is that of a man who was 45 years old when he died. The body was wrapped in bandages, presumably buried, and then pillaged by somebody. Through some bizarre twist of fate, the mummy wound up in a cooler and classified as a woman. Shipwrecks under the Golden Gate Bridge. In 2014, a team of researchers with NOAA, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, used their resources to search for hidden treasures near the coast of San Francisco. Specifically, they wanted to look at the strait of water around the Golden Gate Bridge, near Alcatraz. The depth near the famous prison island is about 100 feet, and then it goes down to about 300 feet closer to the bridge. They started their research by taking sonar scans of the area, and while the researchers were already fully aware that this particular body of water has a lengthy maritime history, they never imagined the scope of what they would find. There are a lot more sunken shipwrecks identified under the Golden Gate Bridge than anyone had anticipated. This area is one of the most important American ports on the Pacific coast, and it has been for hundreds of years. Researchers knew they would find some treasure, but they didn't realize they would find such a staggering number of shipwrecks. Throughout their investigation, the team with NOAA was able to discover the clipper called Noonday. It sank on its fourth voyage in 1863 after hitting a rock. They also found the SS Selja, a huge steam freighter that sank on November 22, 1910. It collided with the USS Beaver and went down like a stone. The team even discovered the USS Conestoga, the wreckage of a tugboat that vanished without a trace in 1921. These boats only scratched the surface of what was discovered. Researchers couldn't believe how many ships they found on the sonar. There are so many shipwrecks off the coast of San Francisco, it will take years for scientists to sort them all out. Who knows how many unexpected discoveries they'll make then? It's shoutout time! I wanted to say a big thank you to Andrew Fetterolf and Bjorn Damrong for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries. Surprises in Old Jerusalem. Jerusalem has to be the only place in the world where a simple elevator installation can turn into an archaeological bombshell. Archaeologists working with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem uncovered a 1st century villa and a ritual bath during the construction of an elevator. The whole purpose of the elevator was to allow disabled people to have easier access to the Western Wall. But before it could be installed, they had to make sure there was nothing ancient on the building site. The Western Wall is the holiest site in the world for Jews, so it's no surprise an elevator a few feet away revealed secrets of the ancient past. The villa is 2,000 years old. Nobody knows who lived in it, only that it was built at the edge of where Jewish temples stood during biblical times. The ritual bath was a private one, likely used by the owner of the villa and their guests. The villa was likely occupied during the Roman invasion of 79 AD, perhaps even destroyed along with the original temple. Letter written by King Charles. As a couple living in England cleaned out their attic during Christmas break in 2022, they found a shocking piece of history. They uncovered a childhood letter written by the current King Charles to his grandmother. The king wrote the letter when he was just 6 years old. It reads on one side, "Dear Granny, I'm sorry that you are ill. I hope you will be better soon." On the other side it reads, "Lots of love from Charles." The letter is also written on official notepaper from Buckingham Palace, dated March 15, 1955. It was written nearly 70 years ago. So what in the world was it doing in a random family's attic? According to the couple who found it, they were gobsmacked by the discovery. It's believed the letter belonged to one of their great-grandfathers, who had worked for the Metropolitan Police and been part of the Queen's protection force in the 1950s. Still, nobody knows how he managed to secure a letter written by the young king, nor how it got lost in the attic for nearly a century. If you're wondering who King Charles's granny was, that would be the Queen Mother, Queen Elizabeth, mother of Queen Elizabeth II. Accidental circumnavigation. On September 6, 1522, the very first known circumnavigation of the world was completed with help from Ferdinand Magellan. What a lot of people don't know is that the circumnavigation was an accident. Magellan never meant to sail around the globe. He was looking for a faster way to reach the Maluku Islands of Indonesia, where extremely valuable spices could be procured. This was a time when spices were some of the most important commodities in the world. People paid incredible amounts of money for pepper, cloves, nutmeg, and ginger. Things that are so ordinary for us today, available down the road at any store, were worth more than their weight in gold in the 16th century. In 1519, Magellan set sail with 5 ships. By the time the Armada circled the globe and made it back to Spain, there was only 1 ship left. Out of the original 270 crew members, there were only 18 people on board the surviving ship, the Nao Victoria. Ferdinand Magellan wasn't even on board because he was killed by a poison arrow after a skirmish with locals on the island of Mactan in the Philippines. Juan Sebastián Elcano had taken over as captain and was the one who completed the first global circumnavigation. The whole thing was an accident, made possible only because Magellan got lost and couldn't figure out how to get back home. This was how the majority of Europeans found out the world is a sphere, an ancient pendant. An amateur metal detectorist stumbled upon the find of a lifetime. Charlie Clark, A local cafe owner in Birmingham was wandering through his friend's field in 2019. His dog had just died, and Charlie was upset. He thought it would ease his mind and distract him if he walked around in the grass and waved his metal detector around. He was never really expecting to find anything. He'd already had the metal detector for 6 months and had yet to come across anything interesting. It was more or less just a way to waste time. And then suddenly, it wasn't. The metal detector started beeping. Charlie got down on his knees and dug around in the dirt, carving a hole up to his elbow. And then he found something amazing. A pendant shaped like a heart and attached to a sparkling gold chain. Charlie told reporters he was so excited by the unexpected find, he screamed like a schoolgirl. This was no ordinary pendant. As Charlie soon learned, it's over 500 years old. The pendant also features the symbols of King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. The pendant chain was crafted from 24-karat gold. Its authenticity was verified by the British Museum, with scientist Rachel King saying the pendant may have been a prize for a jousting tournament. It could have been handed out personally by King Henry himself. Have you ever used a metal detector? If so, did you find anything? Let me know in the comments. The Valley of the Thracian Kings. In World War II, Bulgarian troops were digging trenches to defend themselves against the incoming Soviets. As they were busy preparing their trenches, they accidentally uncovered the very first tomb from what would come to be known as the Valley of the Thracian Kings. The discovery was made near the Bulgarian city of Kazanlak. In World War II, Bulgaria made the choice of siding with Nazi Germany, and as the war was coming to an end, they found themselves being bombed by the Allies and invaded by the Russians. The Soviets came from the east, and so that was where huge trenches and fortifications were built to fend off the Red Menace. 2,500 years prior, Bulgaria was known as Thrace. It was a region ruled by mighty tribal kingdoms who in the 4th century BC came together as a single power. But compared to other civilizations around them, the Thracians weren't quite so advanced. They left no written records of themselves behind, so all we know of them comes from Greek and Roman historians. Homer wrote in the Odyssey that Thracians were mighty warriors who had an obsession with gold and fine horses. Nothing wrong with that. Back to World War II, the trench diggers found themselves staring into the opening of the Kazanlak tomb. This was the eternal resting place of a man and woman who lived in the 3rd century BC. Years later, when archaeologists were able to return and do proper investigations, they guessed the remains belonged to Prince Roygos and his wife. Further excavations revealed even more tombs. This was the Thracian version of Egypt's Valley of the Kings, with over 300 mounds discovered since the 1990s, plus 14 primary tombs holding the remains of Thracian rulers. Lost Christian settlement. Russian archaeologists were called in to deal with a shocking discovery during the construction of a highway. Workers were busy building the new Moscow-Kazan highway when they uncovered the remains of a medieval settlement and a Christian cemetery. When the archaeologists got there, they dug up 46 graves during their excavations. One of the graves contained an embroidered image of Jesus Christ and John the Baptist. The woman who had owned the embroidery was about 16 when she died. We don't know what year she passed away, but it was upwards of at least 5 centuries ago. In Russia during the Middle Ages, a daïs was a traditional representation of Jesus Christ, typically paired with Mary and John the Baptist. The embroidered fabric found in the young girl's grave was likely a headdress made from very expensive silk samite. Only a few other examples of such works of Eastern Orthodox art have been found, all of them in medieval burial grounds across Russia. We don't know much more about the discovery. The medieval settlement was obviously abandoned and then fell into ruin. It has no name or historical records. The burial ground was also forgotten, only found because construction workers had to dig up the ground for the new road. One muddy shoe. A mudlarker is a person who explores the muddy banks of rivers looking for treasure. Specifically, the term became popular in medieval London because people would crawl through the muck of the River Thames looking for lost goods. People still do it today, and one of them found something shocking. The man was wandering along a riverbank in Kent when he discovered what appears to be the oldest shoe ever found in the UK. Carbon dating has placed the artifact at 3,000 years old. The shoe, randomly found on the riverbank, was manufactured around 888 BC. It was a toddler's shoe. Steve Tomlinson, a local resident, was the one who came across the shoe, and it's true that he was purposely searching for goods. Yet nothing could have prepared him for finding such an ancient piece of footwear. It's a surprise he noticed it at all, because it looked like an old piece of garbage smushed into the riverbank. But Steve has a keen eye, and he recognized the weathered leather of an old shoe. He originally thought it was medieval, but now it looks like it belonged to a child from the Bronze Age. The death of Edgar Allan Poe. On October 3, 1849, Edgar Allan Poe was discovered tattered, delirious, and lying in the gutter on a rainy Baltimore street. He was found in that gutter by a man named Joseph W. Walker, who tried to help Edgar get medical attention. A week earlier, Poe had left Richmond, Virginia, to go to Philadelphia to edit some poems for someone named Marguerite St. Leon Loud. However, nobody ever heard from him after he left. Nobody knew what happened to Poe until Walker found him unresponsive in the gutter. 4 days later, on October 7th, Edgar Allan Poe was dead. In the time between, he never regained enough consciousness to explain the details of what happened after he left Richmond. Something or someone had killed Mr. Poe, and over 150 years later, we still don't know what or who it was. But that hasn't stopped the theories from spreading like wildfire. Some believe Edgar Allan Poe was beaten in the streets by a ruffian, never to recover from his injuries. However, there are those who think it may have been alcoholism. A friend of Poe's, biographer Susan Weiss, says he struggled with alcohol his whole life, even if he was a member of the temperance movement. So it seemed possible that he could have drunk himself to death in Baltimore before he ever reached his destination. However, in 1999, public health researcher Albert Donne suggested he died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Coal gas was used for indoor lighting in the 19th century, which means there is a chance that Edgar inhaled too much of it and dropped dead in the gutter outside. There are a lot more theories, including murder, the flu, and even rabies, but nobody has ever been able to definitively say what killed the original master of dark poetry. Let us know what theory you believe in the comments below. Tomb toxins. Shortly after the opening of King Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, stories of a curse began to circulate. One of the workers died, and several of the other people involved in Howard Carter's excavation suffered misfortunes. Prior to the tomb being opened, there were warnings to the archaeologists that they should just leave it alone. They were told to leave the king and his final resting place deep in the Valley of the Kings unless they wanted to face the consequences. Nobody listened to the warnings, and the tomb was opened, allegedly unleashing a deadly curse. Lord Carnarvon was one of the most famous to go first. But what if a curse wasn't responsible for Lord Carnarvon's untimely death? He was the British sponsor of the archaeological expedition in Egypt, supposedly killed by supernatural forces. Instead, scientists have suggested it may have been tomb toxins that killed Carnarvon. There could have been toxic pathogens hiding inside the tomb for thousands of years, just waiting to be unleashed. It could be that these toxins were inhaled by the excavation team, and Carnarvon's immune system became overwhelmed. Jennifer Wegner, an Egyptologist at the University of Pennsylvania Museum, says there are a lot of things inside tombs other than just dead bodies, including rotten meats, vegetables, and fruits. Jennifer believes such raw material may have attracted insects and molds, becoming a breeding ground for bacteria. Recent studies have even proved that mummies carry mold, such as the dangerous species Aspergillus flavus, which is known to cause bleeding in the lungs. What do you think? Do you believe in the curse? Or do you believe in toxic mold? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. It's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to Darlene Corcoran and Dragon Slayer. Thanks so much for watching and supporting this channel. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. The Denver Tunnels. The Denver International Airport was completed in 1995, and for some odd reason, the airport cost roughly $3 billion more than was originally expected. There are known to be at least 6 underground levels of the airport, but there could be more than we know about. The airport was also given a plaque after its completion, which you can see right now in the Great Hall. You might expect to see a dedication to the main contributors who helped build the airport, like the city of Denver or the state of Colorado. But instead, the dedication stone thanks only a single contributor called the New World Airport Commission. What's even stranger is that no such organization has ever existed. Not to mention, the name sounds an awful lot like the New World Order. The stone even has what appears to be the symbol of the Freemasons on it. Some have suggested that the airport, its underground levels, and its huge budget are all connected. The Denver International Airport may have been built by a secret organization of people who are planning to use the facility to survive an apocalyptic scenario. And that brings us to the Denver tunnels. There's supposedly a network of mysterious tunnels underneath the airport that travel all the way to Colorado Springs Air Force Base and the Cheyenne Mountain Complex. Those are 2 of the most secure government sites in the country, and they might both be connected to the airport via subterranean passageways. Nobody knows what secrets might be hidden beneath the Denver International Airport, but it's certainly a strange mystery, and one we likely won't be solving anytime soon. The theft of the Mona Lisa. On August 21, 1911, Vincenzo Peruggia stole Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. The artwork, which was painted in 1503, was taken without anyone's knowledge from the Louvre Museum in Paris, and the culprit wouldn't be captured for a full 2 years. At one point, the authorities even arrested Pablo Picasso because they believed that he was the mastermind behind the heist. The real thief, though, was a petty criminal who moved to Paris from Italy in 1908. Then he took a job as a general caretaker at the Louvre. One of his main responsibilities was to install protective glass cases over paintings. His job gave him unprecedented access to some of the most valuable works of art in the world. He could walk around the gallery whenever he wanted, whether the museum was open or closed, and nobody would ask him questions when he fiddled with some of the paintings. This was what allowed him to sneak away with the Mona Lisa, which he stashed in a false bottom trunk. Vincenzo initially thought he wouldn't have a difficult time selling the painting, but the media frenzy that came after prevented that from happening. The museum offered a substantial reward for its recovery, but 2 years later, when he finally attempted to turn a profit, the art dealer he tried to sell the paintings to ratted him out to the authorities. The whole scandal was one of the major reasons the Mona Lisa is such a popular painting today. Without Vincenzo, the Mona Lisa might have faded into historical obscurity. The Senegambian Stone Circles. The Senegambian Stone Circles are a group of huge stone megaliths in Gambia. Imagine Stonehenge, but really small, and a bunch of them spread over a region of about 12,000 square miles. There are over 1,000 stone circles here. Each one is fairly small, but they are clearly very important. The area contains the biggest concentration of stone circles that can be found anywhere on the planet, with researchers believing it was a sacred landscape used for over 1,500 consecutive years. There is a lot of mystery surrounding the stones. There are about 29,000 standing stones, 17,000 monuments, 2,000 individual sites of importance, and the 1,000 stone circles that I already mentioned. Scientists don't know when the monuments were built, although they've been dated to around the 3rd century BC. Researchers also aren't sure what the purpose of the monuments were. Why build so many stone circles in such a small area? The construction took place over a period of an estimated 400 years. Then, suddenly, all work stopped. This went from being one of the most important places in West Africa to being an abandoned landscape of ruins. The one thing that's for sure is that the civilization who built these stone circles was incredibly advanced. They mined the stone, carved the megaliths, and constructed them with immaculate precision. But sadly, their identity is lost to us. So, the civilization that built this amazing place is currently nameless. The Pyramid Power Plant. The Great Pyramid of Giza may have once acted as a power plant, used to transfer energy into giant machines. Some have theorized that the pyramid was capable of transmitting electromagnetic frequencies, producing energy by sucking it out of the planet. One of these believers is a theorist named Abdel Hakim Aywan, who claims the pyramid was built over an energy deposit deep inside the earth. The ancient Egyptians built the pyramid as a way to control the flow of this natural energy, absorbing it from underground and then storing it inside the pyramid like a giant battery. Nikola Tesla also believed the pyramid wasn't what mainstream archaeologists say it was. Tesla was inarguably a genius, a man who had a secret obsession with the Egyptian pyramids. In 1905, he filed a patent for a machine that he believed would be able to tap into the ionosphere of the planet, drawing massive amounts of energy for storage. Tesla believed the Earth itself was a giant electrical generator, and that if it was tapped correctly, it could produce limitless energy. His initial design was a triangle-shaped machine called Tesla's electromagnetic pyramid. Unfortunately, though, Tesla was never able to find the time, funding, or energy to create his machine. And to this day, we still don't know what the ancient Egyptians used their Great Pyramids for. But what do you think? Was the Great Pyramid of Giza really a giant tomb? Or could it have been a massive power plant for the ancient Egyptians? The USS Cyclops. In March of 1918, the biggest ship in the U.S. Navy vanished without a trace. Over 100 years later, scientists are still scratching their head because they can't solve the mystery of the USS Cyclops. The Cyclops was an astounding 550 feet long and had a crew of 306 people. When it disappeared, it was carrying around 11,000 tons of manganese in its storage compartments. The ship had been in service for about 8 years before it went missing, typically traveling between the Baltic Sea, the Caribbean, and Mexico. Its main purpose was to move coal and assist refugees. But then came World War I. When America entered the war in 1917, the Cyclops became an essential Navy asset. It was then used for transporting coal and troops to other ships. In March of 1918, the ship was loaded up with a huge amount of manganese ore, a necessary component for creating steel. The ship left Brazil and resupplied in Barbados before beginning the long trip to Baltimore. The very last message that was sent by the Cyclops read, "Weather fair, all well." But that was the last time anyone heard anything from the ship, and it was never seen again. There honestly isn't a lot more to tell. The ship vanished without a trace. Some believe it encountered a sea monster and was ripped to shreds, but others think the Bermuda Triangle may be to blame. Over 100 ships and planes have mysteriously gone missing in the Bermuda Triangle over the years, and the USS Cyclops was one of them. However, it could have been a UFO that kidnapped the ship and its crew. The Cyclops may have been the unexpected victim of a German submarine attack. We just have no way of knowing for sure. What do you think happened? The Man in the Iron Mask. There was a man who spent decades as a prisoner inside the Bastille alongside French criminals. Nobody ever knew who this man was or why he was placed inside the jail. There wasn't even one person who knew what he looked like, because every day he wore a black mask that obscured his face. The mysterious prisoner, who has never been identified, has inspired countless legends over the last 4 centuries. From what we know, the Man in the Iron Mask was arrested in 1669. He was originally held in the Bastille under the reign of King Louis XIV. However, he was moved to other prisons throughout his sentence. But no matter where he went, his face was always covered by a mask. So who was he? Philosopher Voltaire believed the Man in the Iron Mask was the twin brother of King Louis. But some modern historians say he was a man named Eustache d'Auger, who said something about the king he really shouldn't have. Some stories have him wearing an iron mask, while others depict him in a mask of velvet. But despite all the controversies and conspiracies, we still don't know why he was arrested and held prisoner for roughly 30 years. We also don't understand why he wore a mask every day, which is the strangest part of the whole mystery. The Crystal Maiden. The Crystal Maiden of the Aktun Tunichil Muknal Cave in Belize is a strange and ghoulish mystery. The jungle cave was found in 1989 deep inside the Tapir Mountain Nature Reserve. It's accessible even today only by driving through the thick jungle for hours, then getting out and walking through even thicker jungle for several more hours. Then, in order to gain access to the cave, you have to swim in and then wade up the cave's river for nearly a mile. You'll also have to push past huge boulders before entering a cavern known as the Cathedral. It was here where archaeologists found the Crystal Maiden, along with the frightening skeletons of sacrificed infants, children, and adults. This dark and creepy cave was used by the Mayan civilization about 1,100 years ago for ritual sacrifices. Archaeologists aren't entirely sure what these sacrifices were for, but they think it was an attempt to bring rain to the jungle. The skeletons found here range in age from newly born to elderly. Some were stuffed into niches, while others were laid out in adjoining caves. Many of these skeletons even show evidence of cranial deformation, meaning their skulls were being purposely reshaped to form a cone. The Crystal Maiden herself was, in fact, a 17-year-old boy. He was only called the Maiden because scientists initially misidentified his remains. His body hasn't moved since 900 AD, and he's been in the cave so long that his skeleton has calcified. His bones are covered in crystals, like sparkly jewels. Romulus and Remus. The Etruscan civilization lived in Italy long before the rise of the Roman Empire. In a way, the Etruscans were the cultural founders of Rome, with their stories, myths, and traditions being absorbed by the Romans when they took over the region around 500 BC. Around that time, the political power on the Italian peninsula changed hands from the Etruscans, who were already losing territory, to the Romans. One of the most important myths for the Etruscan people was their origin story. They believed Thracian and Tyrrhenus were brothers born of the demigod Hercules. These brothers were supposedly the legendary founders of the Etruscans. They made their way to the Italian peninsula shortly after the Trojan War, coming together to create a mighty civilization. In Roman mythology, the story of Romulus and Remus is extremely similar. They were brothers who were raised in the wild by a she-wolf, and later founded the eternal city of Rome. The mystery here is that historians have never been able to agree on if Romulus and Remus were real historical figures. If they were based on Thracian and Tyrrhenus, it means the entire origin story of the Roman Empire was plagiarized, copied by an earlier civilization. Thanks for watching! What historical mystery did you like the most? Which one would you like to learn more about? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button. See you next time. Bye!